So the next session, we're going to talk a little bit about technology and the role of technology. A few of the themes that have come up from 2024 around technology. So again, across the industry, so things like data decision making, customer segmentation, which we've just talked about, predictive analytics, behavioral scoring, we just talked about, omnichannel communication, AI. And all the piece around regulatory elements as well. So a lot of this links to some of the comments we had around customer engagement, and that's what we're going to sort of cover off now. I mean, technology, is an enabler topic. It's a topic that doesn't really sort of go out of fashion. And it continues to be an area of huge focus. So joining me on the panel today, we've got Emma Steeley, who's the CEO from Arrow. So, hey, Emma. Come on up. We got Tamas Kopanyi, Director of Financial Health from Monzo. Where's Tamas? Tamas, come up. Hey. We got Andy Pritchard, who's the Chief Strategy Officer from Telrock. Hey, Andy. And we got Mark Oppermann, who's the Co-Founder and Chief Revenue Officer from Webio. Mark, join us. So welcome. We're out of the last session of the day. Technology. It's always a good discussion. And obviously the heart of a lot of what we do, and a lot of what our customer experience sits on as well. So to kick off the session here, we've all been talking about digital, the role of technology, and we've been talking about the need for how that technology interacts with humans as well. And often we have the feet in both camps in terms of is it digital, is it a technological kind of interaction, or is it human interaction? And it feels like this has evolved over time, particularly since the pandemic. And so that's going to be my first question, really, which was really around how have we seen that evolve and what we're sort of seeing like the latest kind of status. And Tamas, I was going to come to you first, just really asking that kind of question in terms of some of what you've seen in your journey, I mean, across multiple places in terms of customer interaction within CollectIons.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. It's really interesting. I mean, 10 years ago, I think we've all been chasing phone calls and better technology to engage through a phone call. My previous workplace was Thames Water, where we have a cross-section of customers, basically anybody who lives there, and quite heavily indexing still on phone use. And then I moved on to Monzo, which is obviously a digital bank. And I think it's all about what is your customer base mainly these days. The technology is there. Our customers mainly engage in digital. We get 90% of the customers even engage in the app. They don't even chat to us. The chat is in the teens. Phone is in the zilch. That's basically where we are if you are operating in a very digital space. So I think it's there has been a lot of change. I think there is still a customer base where I know we are struggling with the customer base because they are not digitally savvy, and I have seen them in utilities. You still see them that you need to operate the phone lines, but certainly I think it's a lot more developed that you can engage.
Yeah. So if you have a general product, let's say it's across a broader sort of public or a legacy kind of product, you're going to have people in lots of different channels. But if you're saying you've got someone who's been largely digitally acquired and they tend to react digitally, but if someone does react digitally, do they change over their life cycle to then maybe want other kind of channels, or are there kind of needs for that as well, at different points? Or is it once you're digital, if you're acquired digitally, then you're going to always interact digitally?
I would say once you are digital, you are digital. I mean, if you think about it, the customer can engage with you 24/7, and they can even choose the pace. And that seems to be the driver for the customer, what is most convenient. I think in the engagement session, we had a lot of talk about, Sam mentioned it multiple times, making it easy for the customer to engage. And I think digital makes it very easy for the customer to engage if it's done right. It's just a lot of work to get it right. You have to code up a lot of journeys.
I mean, Mark, I mean, you obviously look at, some of the digital engagements. I know you sort of like have to the manual stuff on the back end in terms of like, even though it's through a web portal, you still have manual. How do you find that right balance? And even some of the chat can be a bit can be manual, even though it's through a digital channel.
Yeah, like Webio, we're a conversational AI company, so we're looking to automate as much of the journey as possible. But my view, slightly different, would be that sometimes you will want to have that manual interaction, that somebody that they're going to feel better that they're engaging with a human, albeit that it's through a digital channel, that they actually, when we see the conversations that people have with automation, they are completely different when you see the conversation that they would have with an agent. So you can design really good journeys in digital. You can automate most of the way, but to get the best outcome, both for the business and for the end customer, it has to be a blend of both. So the AI and automation blended with that agent resource. And again, the idea would be that you don't have to just throw people at the problem straight off, because this is more exception management rather than, so you're dealing probably 85, 90% and higher automated, but we see the conversations are different, the outcomes are better, both for the business and for the end customer. So giving that option to do a bit of both is just getting the balance right.
I guess we are not that different in the sense that the digital is more about the channel. So it's whether telephony or whether you are using web chat and in-app chat, but you are right that in the sense that there is still a lot of agents on the other end of that chat. But the question is, do we still need to make phone calls? And if I'm asked that, I'm not sure. I think this is very segment-based.
Andy, what's your kind of view? And I'm also interested in terms of like whether people disclose different information through a more of an automated or a digital kind of channel versus on the telephone as well. That's kind of an interesting, like, are you more open? It's like if you're on social media, people seem to be vicious on social media, but if you're talking with someone in the bar, then they're much more sort of like rounded. I just wonder if you sort of see that in terms of in the collections kind of space, in terms of are people willing to disclose certain information on a phone, and it's different actually if it's done digitally, or is it one and the same?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that would be some interesting data
study, right?
to see there, right? So I think, but look, I mean, I agree with what Mark was saying there. I think the other angle to consider with this, and kind of going back to what Hugh was saying actually in the last session, there's a whole spectrum of clients that are in different places on the maturity cycle and so on. And some of these digital channels can be really difficult to spin up. When you talked about the L word previously, with legacy technology underneath, it used to take a long time to get going. So I think, ensuring that you've got your platforms right and then being able to integrate some of this new technology is a lot easier, and then starting to get those benefits a lot quicker.
Yeah. I mean, Emma, you're sort of, how are you finding it in terms of like how customers are interacting versus not? I mean, are you sort of like seeing that sort of like change coming through? I mean, how are you seeing that kind of change coming through in your kind of space?
Yeah, I think for us at Arrow, it depends really on the product, what product the customer is looking to get, because you're a credit broker that's sitting there with, and on unsecured credit, customers are used to that seamless digital experience. And then we have Arrow Money, which is our secured second charge mortgage business. And so for that, under MCOB, you're having to give regulated advice. And actually, as much as I would love to sit there and go, yes, it's all through a durable medium and we can do it all via WhatsApp, actually, when you go in and I sit in and I listen to the advisors and sit with them, and you can hear these people talking about their lives, and that human touch that was spoken about before, I think is massively important. So for us, it depends on what product the customer is looking for. We still are one of the brokers that actually has a small team where customers can call in and speak about their unsecured credit as well. I didn't join there until 2022, but prior to COVID, they had a team of about 50 people in a call centre. Now there's 12 dealing with those customer calls and understanding where those calls need to go through and where the customer, what circumstances the customer is actually in. when they are applying for credit, because obviously we have to ensure that everything is affordable for them in those instances as well. So yeah, for us, it's really about using the technology to enable the agents and the advisors to do the best possible job that they actually can, but having that tone of voice and understanding the customer, certainly if they're going down the second charge route, because you've got nearly 80% of customers who will be doing debt con in that situation, and ensuring that is affordable credit for them as well. It's an in-depth conversation that can take up to an hour and 10 minutes. It's costly for us as an organisation to actually do that, but having that is something that we consider to be essential.
So we talk a lot about, I suppose, customer interaction. How much do we need to sort of spin it around and think about data gathering, right? Because a lot of this stuff is around data gathering. Yeah. Even an agent conversation is around gathering data to make a decision around which product they want, or if they're in financial difficulties or not. But how do we need to do we need to split it round so it's like around what's the role of data, how do we start thinking about how we capture the data, and how do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, I genuinely believe it's actually about the customer and what they're expecting, right? So in my perfect world, everything would be done just like I can do it on Amazon. It's all done in one click and everything is solved in life. But actually, if we think right back to when a customer is applying for credit, it is something that customers believe is serious, because it is. Taking on credit is something that is serious. And I hate, and I'll think back to sort of like my open banking days on it, when the phrase of positive friction that the banks introduced when open banking first went live, and I was raging about it. But actually, now being on the credit brokerage side, and where the customer is entering details and going through a process of applying for credit, they want to have that friction there. They want to have, because we've taken lots of fields away, and then all of a sudden, customers aren't going through the journey as well, because they expect to input some data. The fact is they don't need to input loads of information, because all of the technology and the data exists to serve it back to them. But, I don't want to talk about legacy systems over and over, following on from the last session as well. But, the problem that we have is that people are not using the technology and the data that is available and linking up together in the right way.
Yeah, I mean, Andy, what's your kind of view on that, and around data and then putting that through the system, and how do you, I mean, what can we capture today? Are we capturing enough? And how do we then make sure that's put through the technology?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think it's the role of providers such as Telrock to ensure that you've got the right platform there to be able to capture as much as you can. I mean, we sell to clients all around the world, and so it's lots of different regulatory landscapes and so on. So, I mean, look, we've recently partnered with AWS, so we're able to utilize a lot of their tools and so on, so incredibly scalable. The issue around data capture, what you want to capture, what you can capture, is not really the issue. It's really more around, what do you need to be capturing, to Sam's point in the last session about what's the data that you're trying to get, what do you need it for, how are you going to then use that thereafter. So it's our job as a platform to be able to give you the ability to be able to capture that. It's then really down to the individual organisation as to how they're going to use that.
I mean, Tamas, I was going to come back to you and just ask around data capture and then how you use that, and segmentation. I imagine you're going to talk about some of those kind of things, right? But how do you see the role of data in terms of deciding treatment, but also deciding, I suppose, personalisation and contact and those kind of things within the collections process?
Yeah, I mean, I've been around long enough to hear always people talking about the richness of data that every company has, and it's true. It's a little bit like my attic. I mean, it's full of stuff. I wish I knew what was in there. So I think that's one of the issues with data, and I think companies need to find a way to go beyond legacy system. Speaking from a seat where I'm sitting on a relatively new system, be it as we want it. So
I can see the smile.
Oh, obviously, yeah. And this is the first time I'm smiling in the last 10 years, believe me. So, but again, this is, I think one of the issues here, we are generating a shed load of data. A lot of it is regulatory requirement, and then, from the FCA, as we have been discussing, there is an expectation, a heightened expectation on lenders that you know it better. So my question is, part of it is magic. I know it better than the customer what the customer's problem is, often. I have more data about the customer than the customer can tell, and frankly, we are probably collectively better at finances than most of our customers. So the question is, how can we use this to benefit the customer? How can we use this to make those good decisions and offer up the customer the right information? And that includes open banking data, that includes using whatever data is already in our systems. And it's a big problem that a lot of legacy systems don't allow that data to come back. And my biggest bugbear is when we have an agent on the phone or on the chat and they sound like a robot. I mean, frankly, if the agent only reads out the questions that you have, you might as well put it in a digital journey. And then the question is, omnichannel technology, how do you hand it over to the agent when it's needed? How do you hand it back to the system? Because we have recently checked, if we ask the mundane questions through the system, it cuts the conversation afterwards in half. And yes, we are spending an hour on the difficult cases on the phone or, well, on the chat, it doesn't matter. Whatever you use, the agent is going to spend half an hour to an hour on there. And halving that amount is massive.
Just one small point there. Tamas, you're right. It's interesting, just good conversational design from the point of view of looking to automate a journey. You will get lots of information, key bits of data that you can use later on in the conversation. Most people don't, I'm not going to take that now, I'll ask that later. So you're actually getting information, small thing, but it just makes the journey much better. If they tell you a certain amount of money to get paid in an answer, don't ask for it 3 steps later because you've already got it. And there's lots of those data points that you will get. So you should be thinking about, can the technology support a much more cleverer journey, because you will get bits of data, and it's just about recognizing what that is, putting it in the right place so you can tag it, that it can be used at different times further on, or just for reporting purposes.
Well, it's quite interesting what you're saying there around conversational design, which is you can have a more efficient conversation and you can design a very efficient conversation, but how human does that come across? Or you can have a very human conversation that waffles a lot, let's say, and it's very inefficient, but maybe it doesn't get to the point quick enough, right? So, I mean, and one or the other, and how do you draw the balance there between that? And can technology kind of help us get to the point, almost like that optimal level, right, where it's efficient, the right information is captured, but it still sounds kind of human to a certain extent.
With good design, yes, you can. Because again, like, we'd see millions of conversations happening every month, and there is a pattern, actually, Sam from Billing Finance earlier. Just give people what they want. Sometimes don't waffle on, just because you can actually give them loads and loads of information. What we find is the best conversations are, and the most effective ones, just be concise when you're giving people answers.
What I was actually thinking about what you were saying there, Mark, and because I love the whole thought process around that conversational way of doing things. And then I think also one of the problems that I have seen across some of the firms, though, is when the calls are then QA'd, or everything is then QA'd, and so the firms need to think of it completely in the round, right? And not just be going to the extent of saying, right, okay, we've implemented this from an operational basis, but then, the agent, if they're then being QA'd, fails on their QA, which potentially puts at risk their bonus for the month or whatever it is, and because, okay, fine, it hasn't done the customer any detriment, but it hasn't met the QA standard because they haven't asked it. So it's about, I think as well, that wider point as well. When we look at, I often talk about banks being unable to change their policies. You're never going to convince a bank to change its policy, so you have to figure out how to work within that. So I do think when we're thinking about how we're engaging and talking with our customers, it's so important that we also bring on board the compliance and the risk side of the business, so that actually the people doing the job, doing the right thing, don't ultimately end up feeling the pain.
I think that's really important. And again, part of it is evidencing. You will hear me talking a lot about testing. I love testing. We always A/B test everything, but I do like it. Anyway, the point is we have tested a few things recently. One of the tests run with more support to the agent with a prescriptive journey, which increased the QA score. And the other one run with allowing the agent more flexibility to talk, and that has also increased at least the customer outcome that we could measure and the customer satisfaction. So we are actually going both ways. I guess the critical question is, how will technology enable us to code this up when you don't have an agent on the phone? So coding up a prescriptive journey is a lot easier than coding up something that is free flow. But again, both of those actually work, kind of.
Yeah. So if you give them more freedom or you're very prescriptive, they both result in better outcomes.
Yeah, there is a bit of an agent experience which nobody will be surprised about. If simpler calls, less experienced agents, more prescriptive, and then if you get the more expert agents in more complex calls, that's where you can give them a little more free rein. So you can segment your portfolio based on problem type and complexity to weigh one or the other, but both of those actually work. The prescriptive is really good at QA, really good with the heightened scrutiny around financial health and customers in financial difficulty from the regulator. And then the free flow, well, it doesn't sound like a robot. I mean, that's all I need to say.
Would those agents be quite experienced agents that you're letting them a bit more free rein? Would they be typically more experienced?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going to come, Andy. I mean, what's the role of technology in sort of like codifying some of that and sort of like, I mean, are we at that point and sort of like, you know, in terms of being able to codify? I mean, where do you sort of see that going?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think has been said all throughout the day today. I mean, technology is moving so quickly. In terms of being able to kind of fully codify that, I think the building blocks are there, and I think as we look at, I'm sure we'll get to AI shortly at some point before the end of the session.
But around,
just in terms of how we're going to sort of support agents and so on, and how we can ensure that still, you know, I mean, the ultimate sort of backstop for any organisation in here or any organisation generally in collections is, you know, do no consumer harm, and so we're trying to ensure that we're building these building blocks in place to give organisations the competitive advantage or the ability to be able to be a little bit more innovative themselves and then build up some of these journeys. And it's really about those individual components and building blocks.
Yeah. Okay, very good. So I'm going to take a bit of a step back and talk about channels. I know we talked about channels before. I was going to have to you, Mark, around to like, I mean, just get your view on the latest channels, what's being seen. You know, I know we talked about WhatsApp typically before and like where that's going. But I mean, are you seeing any kind of change in that kind of landscape from a technical point of view in terms of channels and how people are interacting from a technology point of view?
Not massively. So
Slow
there isn't, oh my God, everybody needs to move to something new. There isn't really that yet. The channels will, there will be a small addition. SMS as we know it will be changing to rich business messaging. It had a foray, let's say, that wasn't too successful going back in various iterations over the last 2-3 years. So rich business messaging is now going to be on both the Google device and also the iOS. So that's only recently happened in the past month. So what you're going to see by the middle of next year, probably 70-80% of iOS devices would have rich business messaging. So from a channel point of view, if you were to say, design SMS today, using the technology of today, not from 30 years ago, and knowing the devices are different, that's what it'll look like. So it'll be a basic message, can have a brand, a bit like what WhatsApp does. You can have loads more, files and stuff like that. So that's the change that everybody will see over the next 12 months. More and more businesses will be going down that road.
And if I sort of explain, like the RCS stuff, at least anyway, is more like WhatsApp style messaging, but not WhatsApp. So you know what I mean?
It's WhatsApp over SMS.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's. But that now will be. And one of the drawbacks was like for the UK, I think it's about 52% of mobile devices are iOS. So it was only getting out to half the market. That's going to be it's solved, and you will see more people adopt that.
And will that work around some of the concerns or restrictions that have been around on the WhatsApp side? I mean, so it would be much more like SMS will be able to be used for everyone. Right?
Yeah. One of the big challenges for people using WhatsApp, our recommendation is always, look, it's a brilliant channel for driving inbound. So you have your widget on the website along with your WhatsApp or with your web chat if you have that. You have the QR code going on a letter. You have a big WhatsApp button on your email. All of these things are to encourage people to engage with you. Phenomenal way of getting people to engage with you. Limit the outbound, because there has been cases where WhatsApp have blocked clients that have gone outbound to engage with customers. So yeah, it's much that Meta are a law unto themselves, so they will, and they have blocked clients of ours for no reason that we can. So yeah, it's an inbound channel, we would say, it would be the way.
And what's the balance between sort of these almost like real-time kind of channels, or even whether you do it even real-time versus more sort of like asymmetric kind of or delayed kind of communications? I mean, what's that kind of balance? I mean, Andy, maybe just, I don't know, you kind of respond on that in terms of like where do we sort of sit on that in terms of like the real-time? How important is real-time in getting to answers quickly versus not?
I think it can be a bit of a blend, to be honest. I think there's benefits of both. I think, just going back to the RCS piece very briefly, I think that's going to be really interesting over the next 12, 18 months as we sort of send these rich messages, media messages with different sort of interactions available, branded, a lot more trust, secure. There's been a theme through today as well. In terms of sort of real-time and not, I generally think there's a place for both, and our clients will use a kind of mixture of both as well. I'll be interested to hear what sort of Tamas's view is, because I know that you guys use this as well. But I think there are some instances where you don't need that real-time interaction, but you just need to know that you are having a slow-time dialogue, albeit through a digital channel. There are other times where it's super important and you want that real-time engagement.
Yeah. Certainly, if I'm in the supermarket, I don't want to have a real-time conversation. I want to start it, and then when I've checked out, then I'll carry it on a little bit. I mean,
it's just a very small point. It's one of the biggest challenges for companies who've traditionally done phone calls, because their measurements are average handling time, first call resolution, all the things that a contact center with lots of people on the phone, and then the minute you move to digital, it is asynchronous. It can take 4 hours, but it's a great conversation and it concludes successfully. So yeah, it's that trying to get your head around this is different.
And I suppose the question there is around what's the chat persistence? Is that the right term? Like how long do you leave the chat open versus not? I suppose.
Yes. Yeah. That comes back to a compliance thing. Some channels will be restricted. The likes of WhatsApp, we mentioned earlier, you have a 24-hour window from the last time your customer has engaged with you.
Yeah, so I mean, Emma and Tamas, I'm kind of interested in your perspective, sort of dealing with customers.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I actually can echo that when we first started to experiment with even two-way SMS 10 years ago and web chat, everybody was expecting to digitize the phone experience. And especially in earlier years. Later years was always lower velocity. You only talk to 10% of your customers. But earlier years, everybody expected instantaneous response. So we have tested it. Most of our communication is through our in-app web chat. So it kind of shows that merger of technology with the rich messaging, that it's basically coming on your phone, doesn't matter where it is coming from. You see it on your phone. What we found was customers are fine with asynchronous messaging. In fact, the difference between a 1-hour response, a 4-hour response, and a 24-hour response had very small difference in final outcome. So when we looked at the statistical significance on engagement increase or decrease, we found none. There are 2 points where we have found some opportunity. One, when you have a relatively fast resolution, but we are talking about a 1-hour response and probably 9 hours end-to-end, so within the same day end-to-end resolution for the customer, that improves customer satisfaction. doesn't improve engagement, but it improves customer satisfaction with the journey. And then if you can do something truly digital and you can have instantaneous responses, there is a tiny uplift in outcomes, in resolution as well. So you can get a little bit of an engagement uplift, but it's gone after you are beyond 30 minutes response. So asynchronous is actually working surprisingly well.
It'd be interesting to see how that changes by almost like generationally as well. So if you talk with young kids down, like even if you've been left read but not responded to, that seems to be an issue. That seems an issue it seems to be an issue in our house. I don't know if that's an issue of the future for us. Whereas I might leave it days until I respond. I'm afraid.
Just one thing there. It is quite funny from a training point of view.
Yeah.
Don't always assume the agents that are best on the phone can transition into digital.
Yeah.
Because it's a completely different skill. Because what I've seen, sat with agents and a message goes out and they're waiting there for the reply and there's 10 other messages that they could be dealing with. What are you doing? I'm waiting for that person to reply. Now they could come back an hour later, they could come back 30 seconds later, but there is a training of how people should do digital. You can't just pick up what you do on the phone and drop it into a whole new area.
Emma, what's your kind of perspective on it?
Well, I think the collections industry has actually moved a lot faster than when I look at the second charge mortgage space, right? So second charge mortgage space, you've got a small number of lenders in the space, and you've got primarily like the brokers such as us that feed in to those lenders. And it's like, unless one of them agrees for you to do it, you can't actually do it, because then it has to roll out across every single broker across the industry as well, right? So we're kind of held back at that. So the most important measure still within our Arrow Money business is decision maker contact. Like how do we increase the DMC? And it's a question that I hear the commercial director of that business ask like consistently. We need to change the tile. We need to change the tile so it looks like this, and they're forever running tests and they're all really well intentioned, but actually the engagement is not being increased. But I really take on board actually the points that are being made in terms of the people that are probably the best on the phone aren't necessarily the best people to do the digital side of things when they're looking to engage with the customer. So we need the industry in second charge to be moving more in that direction of the digital engagement as opposed to having to do the phone calls.
It's quite interesting because all of our experience from the customers is changing, our experience of our employees is changing as we sort of like learn about it. It's like, how do we best react to that as well because it's a changing kind of environment as well.
I think it's interesting that there's an industry that's moved a bit slower than collections
I know,
actually
it's
in
fascinating,
technology,
isn't it?
because I think we've always been apparently so, according to Emma. So look, I think that's but it's understandable, right? It's a sensitive, highly regulated part of financial services, part of the industry, but I think it is speeding up a little bit. I mean, I've been in and around for about 25 years, and it used to be very slow, there's a huge lag behind lots of other areas that were moving much quicker, and I think that is starting to speed up a little bit more now. We're starting to see that pace move a little bit faster.
How do we think about, just from outside of the customer perspective, which we've talked quite a bit about, but also the agent, how do we think about it from an agent perspective in terms of like, you have all these channels, you have all these different ways of communicating, it's all now sitting within your collection strategy potentially as well. I mean, all of this is added complexity in terms of like, how do we best translate that into our collections process? I mean, Andy, that's kind of closest to maybe what you do, and then maybe a little bit from Mark.
Yeah, so it's a really good question, right? You can get overloaded with kind of too much data there, trying to understand how you kind of cut through that, and too many channels. Yeah, absolutely. Look, and it's only likely to be added to as well. Look, I think I kind of, without a bit of a slippery shoulder answer, I think it depends organisation by organisation and sector by sector, right, as to how they're going to manage that, what's right for them, what's right for the customer, what's right for the organisation, what's their style. I was speaking to not one of our clients, but someone in the industry about 6 months ago that was very anti-digital. Their view was they were predominantly a mortgage lender, and they were like, we've got a duty of care to just put a person on the phone. It's like, yeah, but that person, the customer may not want to speak to a person. They may want to interact digitally. So I think it really does, depend on style, on the consumer base, the sector, the volume, and so on. So it's very, again, I think providing all of these tools, having an organisation understand what's right for them, what's the right answer that they need to get to for their
I
consumer.
mean, all that sounds like added complexity, I'm afraid, doesn't it? It's like you've got to have it, depending on what your market is, know who your customer is to a certain extent. I mean, Mark, what's your kind of view?
Just seeing the practical sides of where most of our clients will have telephony agents and then they will have digital agents. We'd always recommend have a smaller team, because a smaller team will be able to do the job of a much larger telephony team. But they're quite interesting. It's going back 4 or 5 months ago. I was on site with a client and they were talking about their recruitment challenges. And I think everybody probably would be feeling the same. It's difficult to get sort of agents to come in and do the work on a phone. But they were having challenges. But then they actually advertised for digital collections agents, and they were oversubscribed. So the concept of phone work isn't as attractive. And it's just, that was one thing that I found quite interesting, that they were talking about, that they actually had better interest in the job and the retention rates were higher. So, Tamas, I don't know, would you see that yourselves? Or, again, most of your stuff is digital, so you don't have the phone work, or it's very small.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised by the high level of attrition in the contact center in the last 2 years. We used to be able to make it bearable for agents, and I think probably this whole channel switching and dealing digital in the digital world differently can be overwhelming. So we definitely need to improve our support of the agents. And I think I can echo the sentiment of, I don't know, I think it might be a generation thing. A lot of the agents are quite early in their careers. I mean, it's a kind of a starter job for a lot of people. They don't want to talk to on the phone. It's like, it's no longer only the customer is being embarrassed about the whole conversation, but the agent too. Honestly, it's like nobody wants to talk. And we hear that you need to know your customer. I'm surprised how much information the customers are willing to share voluntarily in a digital channel on the basis of they don't need to talk to anyone. And I think we are friendly. We train the agents. There is all that enhanced awareness of vulnerability across the industry, and I think everybody does that. It's a requirement these days, and still. Yeah, customers sometimes just prefer to fill it out on a form.
I think that there is that element as well of when you are speaking to a customer, you're open to being abused by that customer as well. So let's not pretend that all customers are going to speak to you really, really nicely. And I think about my best friend who used to work at a lender that I worked at, and the abuse that she would get down the phone when she was just trying to do her job was unbelievable. She now works in Waitrose and still gets incredible abuse from people when she's trying to do her job on the till. So, it's humans aren't always nice to each other. And so I do think certainly when it comes to recruitment of people, a lot of the time that maybe what they're not wanting to do is have to have that engagement and being open to abuse from customers.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting kind of perspective, isn't it? So I've been trying to avoid it, but AI, I'm going to talk about AI now, so we've sort of tried not to cover that too much. How and when do we use AI, and when is it best to use AI? I mean, so what are sort of like what's the latest kind of thinking, I suppose, around that, in terms of like, where do we kind of sit? Because there was so much noise about it last year. It was all we talked about, and it feels like it's evolved over the last sort of 12 months. And I think we've got feels like it's a little bit more realistic in terms of like where we think it can be best used. But what are the latest thoughts on it? I'm going to go across the panel here. Maybe Tamas, start in terms of what you kind of think.
Yeah, I mean, AI is surprising. The other day I read an article translated from Spanish, and it read perfectly fine in English. So, I think AI can do a lot more these days, not to mention my kids having fun with it on my phone. But I'm still worried about letting the AI talk to my customers, to be honest. What I see about AI and machine learning is that these technologies are like very, very hard-working individuals, not necessarily the smartest ones, but definitely the most hard-working ones. So I think a lot of that prescriptive analytics that we have been talking about, that you mentioned, can come from AI, and I think that's where I see it next. That's where I want to understand it better. Our segmentation is based on scoring models, and it is notoriously bad at doing a bunch of things. For example, early intervention. Everybody can come up for me with scenarios when somebody starts to shop in Aldi instead of Waitrose until you put it in a logic, into a scorecard, and it doesn't work. So what I'm hoping is that AI can speed up the testing of the segmentation and speed up the ingestion of the huge amount of data that we are using today, and can hopefully spit out some solutions that human subject matter experts can check. Because I still think that we need human subject matter experts to really check what is the logic behind it and does it hold up.
Yeah, I mean, particularly from a decisioning point of view, you're saying.
Yeah, and particularly if the FCA is going to come in and check whether your decisioning was based on sound principles. I don't think they would look kindly at, well, the AI told me.
Yeah. I mean, Miles, your kind of perspective in terms of the latest developments, particularly from a common space, I'd say.
Yeah. Okay. So, God, where do we start? So, I'm going to just on a sort of, let's talk just from a personal point of view. That as well from a business point of view, we've been doing this for the last 4 years. It's not easy. We spent the first 2 years trying to get the models of how to take customer data in to make sure that you're able to use that correctly, because crap in is going to be crap out, basically. But we look at this from a different point of view. We don't at the moment do anything that would be customer facing, because quite frankly it's just not there yet. So what we're looking at from our AI is saying, how can we identify what the customer is saying? First off, how can you help the identification and verification? And simple things like, and this is not like, somebody goes, you ask what their date of birth is. My date of birth is actually it's tomorrow, and I was born in 1980. Oh, I wasn't born in 1980, no, it's a few years before that, but however. So what it's going to do is, that's just a natural way. If you said that to an agent on the phone, they'd go, well, today's the 7th, so it's the 8th of November, 1980. Oh, that matches, and away you go. Or I can pay you £50 next Monday. Those type of things where you're just trying to get the person into the conversation. When you get them into the conversation, what the AI can do is start to look at what do they actually want from that conversation. So again, you can start to have a much better journey. So there's no coding involved. It's all trained. The models it's a customized collections language model. So it knows the language from a legal and compliance point of view. And then finally, it's a bit like we were talking earlier about the junior agents are quite scripted. The experienced agents, they can have a bit more. But if you're then looking at what's the propensity for an outcome. So if I was to look at all our customer conversations, the moment here in the UK, 47% of those conversations are exhibiting traits of vulnerability. So we're flagging that to the business to say, actually, this is a health vulnerability or whatever type of vulnerability would be, and then they're deciding what journeys that they want internally. So there's a lot it can do. It can do conversation summaries back to the agent if they were to get involved. There's loads of things that are happening, really clever stuff. But does it, is it, and I jest and I laugh when I speak with somebody and they think, oh, AI, and they think it's this magic blanket. If you got the problem, you throw the blanket over it and the problem goes away. That's AI for you. And you kind of go, oh, not exactly. So it can do lots. And it has made a huge impact in lots of our clients, but it's in a place, it is developing quickly, but not to the point, even from a compliance point of view, it's not yet able to manage those conversations with end
But
clients.
all of those examples you used are sort of like very practical. So we're getting to the practical end of what can be done versus maybe what is just magic blanket dreaming.
Oh, look, it's a step process. Like the next, which is about to, sort of the co-pilot. So it will deliver suggested responses based on historical data, what was the best outcome, but that will be given to the agent. That won't be given to the customer. So again, you're taking baby steps all the time, because quite frankly, you could do that, but more than likely, 99.99% of customers' compliance officers would go, no, we can't take the risk.
Which is very much what Tamas is saying.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Andy, what's your kind of view on like the latest status and where you think it's going to go?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree as well. I think we are just absolutely scratching the surface of this at the moment. And whenever there's a big new kind of technology innovation, I'm reminded of a line from the film Jurassic Park, which is, we were so busy wondering what we could do, we didn't stop to think whether we should do it. And I think in this sort of situation, you've got very much that kind of mindset, which is, what are all the things that we could do with AI? But I think we really are just kind of scratching the surface. I remember being at an event, a collections event 6 or 7 years ago, and the upshot was very much based on AI being, we know AI is not new and it's a lot older than 6 or 7 years, but in terms of sort of coming into the kind of mainstream conversation, and there was a view of we can't use AI in collections because we can't have this sort of binary, let AI run our decisioning for us, our strategy for us, and contact customers and so on. And I think that was quite a naive view. And we look back on that now and start to understand some of the nuances around AI and some of the things it can do, whether that's really easy to translate things or whether that can be picking up on some voice analytics and turning tomorrow in 1980 into the 8th of November 1980 and so on. And from a Telrock side, we're kind of looking at it on two fronts. And some of the less glamorous stuff, some of the back office stuff as well that you kind of have behind the scenes. So whether that's instead of running a large suite of reports, or as well as doing that, you can interact with some natural language processing and pull some, through the use of Power BI, being able to interact and pull some reports that you maybe wouldn't normally have. You can also get it looking for any trends or any other things that a human may not pick up on or that it can just understand quite quickly. Again, with that kind of firewall between the consumer. And then I think on the front office side as well, this is where we're all going to start throwing some use cases and some kind of touch and learn and see what happens. But I think it will be in this suggestive, supportive, co-pilot sort of scenario, and even simple things such as wrap-up notes for agents to save them doing it, being able to restructure those notes into a structured data store that you can then search on them and things like that. So relatively sort of simple things in small areas, but to try and kind of prove the use cases and keep iterating. But I think we have just scratched the surface and there's a lot more to go.
One of the things we haven't talked about is APIs, and particularly agentic AI that comes up as well. So I mean, APIs have been a big boon for us in terms of connecting different services and connecting off different services. One of the things that's also being talked about is this agentic AI, which is like, if something's off slightly on your API, then the whole thing falls over. But now you can have a little bit of that sort of like fuzzy kind of logic where it will sort of allow that communication to happen, maybe sort of like perfect kind of way as well. So I mean, I don't know if that's APIs seem to be a massive boon for us.
I mean, really important. Yeah, you can get sort of business analysts being able to build data in, data out, where you would normally have IT teams where there's always a bottleneck, and it can be done in minutes and hours instead of weeks, months, and years. So hugely important, and making sure you've got the right coverage on APIs as well is really important.
Yeah.
Just even one thing there from the point of view of previously, if you go back 5 and 6 years, you had a huge decision to say you have to pick one vendor and go with them and nearly stick with everything that they have. It may not be the best in every area, where nowadays, because of the ability and the capability of APIs, you can actually be a little bit more selective in, I want a selection of best practice together. That's much more possible now than ever before, because previously it was just the project would, it's possible, but don't worry about it. It'll be 4 years from now before we deliver it. and then it didn't work. I'm not looking at you.
Emma, what's your view on AI in particular?
AI, I'm a big fan of generative AI for content. It helps, it makes life more efficient, no doubt about it. It helps me at work regularly. It helps my daughter write her English poems. You know, it's, I heard her say in half term, thank you, ChatGPT. I was like, oh God, you're going to get in so much trouble. But, you know, I also, you know, I think about AI in the wider sense as well with regards to credit decisioning, and that for me is something where I am completely uncomfortable at this standpoint, and I'm not sure when I will get comfortable. And my problem with it, with regards to credit, thinking about it for credit decisioning, it is trained on historical data. The historical data is inherently biased, so you're going to train a system to be biased if you're making a credit decision. So I'm really uncomfortable with it there. With regards to, you know, we invested heavily actually in machine learning, created something called personal credit matching. And we based that on outcome data from the lenders, like we call about 70 lender APIs every time a customer does an eligibility check with us. And what we actually found was that there was some lenders were potentially gamifying what they were sending back, saying somebody was 100% eligible, hashtag, you know, star, asterisk, you know, subject to final checks, and then you'd go through and that customer would only convert at under 5%. That was not a good customer outcome. So we invested and changed and created personal credit matching. So actually only in about 20% of cases, we then showed the customer a different offer at the top, which was the one that they were most likely to actually get the credit that they needed. So for us, that we have a constant kind of evolution of machine learning that we still focus on more than AI.
Yeah, well, it's an evolving kind of landscape, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I suppose we talked right at the start of the day around regulation, the importance of regulation, how that's kind of like changing. What do you think the impact's going to be on regulation, and then how can technology kind of help support us with that? I'll come back to you, Andy, just in terms of like, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I think, you know, with regard, the regulator is going to always struggle to keep up with technology. And I think that's the fundamental issue that we're facing into right now. You know, everybody here will sit here and say, you know, it is a privilege to be regulated, you know, and it's something that is so important to us in this country to have those regulations in place. But, you know, what we actually need is to, I talk to my team and I say the word cadence a lot, increase the cadence and figure out with the regulator what direction do they really want to go. There's a lot of information gathering, but we also need to understand what direction that is really going in so that we can be preparing for the outcomes as that technology is continuing to evolve. Yes,
having that vision and direction. And
yeah.
Andy, what's your kind of view?
Yeah, I mean, along the same lines, I think there's, you know, I think ensuring again that good outcomes are happening. Technology is an enabler, as you said at the start, at the very top. I think being, you know, cautious of some of these areas where it's not completely explainable. You know, none of these, you know, sort of the black box that data goes in, decision comes out, and we don't really understand it. There's no transparency there. So yeah, look, we're still dealing with what, a 50-plus-year-old Consumer Credit Act, right? So you know, we're really struggling to kind of to keep up with it. And as that pace does change, and it is picking up, and it really is picking up now, I think they're really going to struggle with it. So I think it's the overarching outcomes for the consumers, you know, and being cautiously balanced.
There is a number of EU legislations. Again, it may not be applicable here, but it is around that explainable AI. So, and you mentioned the magic black box, that it don't just happens all in there. It has to be explainable, and that really is where the whole idea of, from the design point of view, you're going to have to think in those terms that actually, if it's given a decision, or if it's categorize somebody as vulnerable, it will need to be able to explain that and explain why it, you know, and it needs to be easy understood. So, you know, that I think we've moved along the road quite a good bit, and it's getting to a much better place. And again, legislation will catch up for sure, but I think what people should be thinking of is, let's actually get out ahead of it rather than actually trying to play catch-up.
And that evidencing piece, Tamas, that evidencing piece, we touched on it in one of the previous sections, which is like, how do we gather the data, then how do we sort of analyze the data to then build the evidence to then go back to the regulator? I mean, how you guys think about it? You seem like you're quite data rich where you are now. It's almost like, how do you build the infrastructure to be able to demonstrate that?
Yeah, so I think, again, I totally agree with everybody here, and occasionally I like regulation. I think it's a dubious privilege to be regulated. Comes with a lot of strings attached, but like every good relationship. Anyway, the point of the evidencing here is we really need that subject matter expertise. So what AI can do for us is go through a lot more data, but then whatever it spits out as an opportunity, we still need to take a look at it. And in terms of the evidencing, what I found, and not only with the FCA, also with FOS, that it becomes increasingly important in the decisions of, can you explain what is the logic behind doing something or not doing something? Can you put a number against it? You know, this is a 5% chance of the customer actually going to arrears. Can I expect the customer to do one thing or another, or am I going to get complaint from 95 customers because I'm forcing them to do something that is not good for them? And I think Sam mentioned that sometimes in the previous session that sometimes it's not what is intuitive to the regulator that is good for the customer. People might be using the credit product a little bit differently, and it might actually be the good decision for them. So I guess the question is, can we democratize the decision making by enabling our teams to go through more data, to use machine learning, to use AI, and then use those to support the documentation, the proposals that will stand up to regulatory scrutiny, that will help us to explain to FOS, yeah, I didn't think this customer was over-indebted because they didn't do this or that. Because irresponsible lending becomes a big thing with the FOS. The regulator looks with very, very serious 20/20 hindsight on any outcome that the customer received in financial difficulty. We need to be able to document why are we categorizing something as one or the other.
So it's not just about having the data. I mean, having the data is the first step, but then it's analyzing the data and then really being able to back up your argument with the data to be able to then do it. I mean, to be able to back to the regulator and be able to stand your ground on it.
Absolutely. Now, to be honest with you, it is actually the right thing to do. I like to make decisions based on data. I like to do something because I believe this is going to help the customer. So it's not something that we wouldn't do. It's just the fact that we need to be able to, we need to go to extreme lengths to actually make sure it's documented, it's clearly described.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. So I don't know if we just put the Slido questions on, and I'll just as we're going through that, and then I'll just go past, just ask the panel in terms of where you think we'll be developing in the sort of like, what we'll be talking about this time next year. No doubt we'll be talking about AI. I would think I'll try and avoid it. But I mean, what's on the plate for us? What have we got to watch out in 2025? And Emma, I'll just maybe start with yourself.
I think I'd go to sort of the regulatory scrutiny more than anything. To be honest, you know, we've had regulatory reviews on second charge. We've had regulatory, not reviews, but they came in and interviewed sort of the top 10 credit brokers of the UK just to get information. So I think it's the regulatory scrutiny and how we have the robustness in the technology to stand up to that regulatory scrutiny.
Okay, so regulatory definitely on the Tamas, mate, what are your kind of views on like what's bubbling and what have you got to watch out for 2025?
Yeah, so I think AI will definitely be around, and the regulatory scrutiny definitely. Let me be a little bit more optimistic. Let's hope that AI will help us to solve this hyper-personalization and maybe even financial inclusion. So with additional data, can we give customers access to credit and drive away from the illegal lending? Because the best intention, the regulator is looking at affordability, but this means a lot of customers are currently excluded from mainstream lending. And those are the customers who need money the most. So the question is, can we use machine learning and AI to be a little bit more financially inclusive.
I love the optimism.
Just to say on that for 1 second, evidence in that, we have about 300,000 eligibility checks a month that come into Arrow, and I would say 140,000 of those customers are declines. And so, yeah, financial inclusion is definitely required.
Yeah. So I love the optimism as well. That's good to finish the day. Mark, what's your... it's on the plate for next year.
Yeah, definitely AI. But I think let's be sort of more specific about that. I think what we'll be doing is we'll be looking back at examples of where it is helped. I definitely think by this time next year, that hyper-personalization, I'm already seeing things that we're doing and others that certainly will so yeah, I think it's just really, I think it'll be some really interesting use cases that people will be talking about that have happened between now and next year that will get people very excited about what's capable.
Okay.
From an enterprise collection technology perspective, I think more cloud adoption, cloud innovation as well, and then also on the AI front, I think is these kind of nuances. So explainable AI, I think, is really going to become a big thing over the next year, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that this time next year.
Okay, fantastic. So there were a couple of questions. I don't know if we can put them on the big screen as well. Kevin talking about cybercrime and I suppose cost-effective cyber prevention as well. I don't know if anyone had any sort of comments on that before we sort of finish really. So technology priority for 2025. Maybe they're not questions. So definitely the fraud stuff comes through. Yeah.
This is the poll, Chris. I think this is a poll on what is the technology priority.
Yeah. It was a poll. So
well,
were there any questions as well? Maybe the answer to that is no. So thanks to everyone on the panel today. Thank you everyone for sticking out the day and enjoying the questions. Oh, we do have questions. There you go. I'm sorry, you're about to go. A few more minutes. So, with the rise of AI communications, digital and phone, what do you think it's misleading to make it sound human, and what are the risks with consumer trust? That's quite interesting. Role of technology, given the rise in cyber attacks and the supply chain, what are the key trust tools that consumers recognise? Has the emergence of more customisable, secure payment links, including A2A payments, helped with customer engagement? And we've all talked about digital, and I suppose that was a question we talked about, digital payments. But maybe the top one here, Mark, around AI communications. Do you think it's misleading to make it sound human?
We'd always advise our client to say, look, just be open about it, that, look, this is your auto agent, or they name it, or I don't think there's anything to be gained trying to, I'm not going to say fool the customer that they're actually speaking with somebody, because actually they will speak differently, and you probably will get more concise answers if they think they're speaking to, I'm going to use the term robot, so we'd always say, look, just be open and upfront about it. That is, it's just a good policy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, fantastic. So yes, certainly I'm quite happy to talk with the robot if he gets me to the answer quicker. So
normally they do.
So thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to all of the speakers throughout the whole of the day. A round of applause for this panel, please. So that's it, really. I think we're at the end of the day. Thank you very much for being here. I'm going to hand back to Colin just to quickly wrap up before hopefully see some of you later.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone. Just wanted to wrap up and say, well, first of all, let's give Chris a round of applause because he's worked really hard throughout the day. Probably makes the event. Bit of an interesting segue. So we obviously have the Credit and Collections Technology Awards tonight. Definitely, if you had a word cloud for the event, AI is in there in nearly every entry in some shape or form. So yeah, really, really interesting. But big thanks to all the people who've given up their time for. We don't just put this event together and just turn up. We have rehearsals and everything. So a big thank you to all the speakers for all their help and support. And obviously our sponsors, I won't name them all again, but yeah, really good. Just to round up as well, anything we don't cover, I know there's a lot of questions that we didn't get to, which probably says something positive. We'll write a review on the Credit Connect website, but just want to end by saying thank you for everybody coming along today, and we'll hopefully see you next year. We're going to have another event in May, face-to-face in York as well, so we hope to see you there. But thanks a lot, everybody.